Okay, everybody, welcome to the third session of the day 4 R2 Solutions Developers Week. Today we will have Brad Wood. He's going to talk about runtime environment configurations. And R2's Developers Week is a 3-week-long online conference led by the R2's team, and all sessions will be recorded. So if you miss any of them or you will miss any of them tomorrow, you are always welcome to visit ortosolutions.com/ODW and take a look to the videos. Why ODW? Because we love training, we love education. This is a week that is designed for developers. We want to expose products, projects, and everything, new cool stuff. We also want to increase community involvement and adoption. We are a professional open source. We offer training, support and mentoring plans, architecture and design sessions, web development, server tuning, security and setup. You can become an R2's patron. You can help us to maintain Forgebox.io alive, our documentation, downloads, and that way you sponsor our open source development. We are in day 4, session number 3, November 9th. Just a quick reminder for next week event in Las Vegas, the CF Summit RESTful Services Bootcamp. It's gonna be so cool. So you still have time to get your tickets. There is the link over there. You can use our discount code ODW2017. Remember, limited seating, so don't miss it. Also next year, we'll have our yearly Into the Box conference. Registration is open. So it's gonna be in Houston, Texas, in April 25th to the 27th. So if you're a speaker or you are planning to attend our conference, please visit our website intothebox.org for more information. And Brad, is all yours. Okay, let the show begin.
Okay, busy answering questions on Slack. I blame Carl Van Sutton. All right, sharing screen, moving copious numbers of Slack windows, not Slack, Zoom. I'm not sure what happened to the view session, David. Is that the one that was this morning? The one that was this morning, the speaker backed out. Okay, so how many people, we don't have a ton of people in the room, how many people are here? 15. How many people are already using CommandBox to manage servers? Maybe I should ask, is there anyone who's not familiar? Okay, minimally get in there. Well, that's good. That'll tell me how much to spend on the first slides in the presentation. I'm sort of taking a presentation that I gave at Into the Box last year on running servers with CommandBox, just managing multiple servers. And CFconfig was like brand new. It is all over it. Yes-ish. And CFconfig was brand new when I first gave this presentation. So I'm going to breeze through all the beginning slides. But I feel a little better about having them in there since there's some people that aren't 100% using CommandBox for stuff. So it'll be hopefully some new information for some people. All right, so about me. This time you actually get an About Me slide as opposed to my About Gavin slide yesterday. Been doing Cold Fusion for a while. I'm a geek. I like my Android phones. I blog at Coders Revolution. I'm the ColdBox developer advocate, and I guess sort of CommandBox as well now. Also a magician. well, not magician, though I used to be when I was a kid. Musician, shade tree mechanic. I have 3 beautiful daughters. So enough about me. About you. Let's talk about you for a minute. How do you feel about me? No, just kidding. So as developers, right? This is what our friends think we do all day long. This is what our mom thinks we do. We ride around the moon on a robot unicorn. Anybody see the show Brave Star from the 80s? Reminds me of that. This is what our coworkers think we do. Sleep at the job all day long, or maybe watch webinars. What we really do, at least for some of us, is we watch progress bars all day long. We install stuff and configure stuff, and it's such a pain, isn't it? And this is what we're here to talk about. We install Cold Fusion 9, 10, 11, 2016, Custom Wars, Lucy, Rilo, Tomcat, Jetty, Apache Nginx, IIS, all sorts of junk, as well as Cold Fusion project dependencies, as libraries like ContentBox and ColdBox. And we watch progress bars all the time. Then we have to configure all these things, right? The ports, HTTP, AJP, installation directories, URL rewrites, virtual directories, all of our hosts. And if you're doing testing, we have to do everything in this list, again, for every single version of Cold Fusion. And I know a lot of you guys have probably had to deal with multiple versions of Cold Fusion and or Lucy and or Rilo installed on your machine at the same time, and it's a pain. It's a total pain. You have to change all the ports so they don't conflict. And if you ever had to reinstall your operating system, it's just perish the thought, right? So you're kind of hurting cats as a developer sometimes, trying to manage all of your servers. And this is where CommandBox comes into play. So CommandBox is a command line tool, runs Cold Fusion from the console, like we talked about in my session yesterday on task runners, can manage your code libraries. It can also be used as a build tool. You can publish packages to ForgeBox, but most importantly, you can start, stop, and manage servers. CommandBox is also good at generating ASCII art. We like ASCII art in CommandBox. I'm going to gloss over some of the stuff we've already covered a few times. It's native binary, runs on Mac, Windows, Linux. It's not very big, it's under 40 megs, and it's open source, and it's actually written in Cold Fusion. So to be able to start a server, you don't need to have anything installed on your computer other than CommandBox. This may sound crazy to someone who's been doing Cold Fusion for years and they're used to, oh my gosh, going to the Adobe site, finding the Cold Fusion product page, logging in to the Cold Fusion site, downloading possibly one of their download managers, downloading an installer that can be from 500 megs to a gig in size, running the installer, next, through all the screens, setting everything up. It can take, an entire day just to get Cold Fusion installed to the point where you can just run a CFM file. This is not the case anymore with CommandBox. The only thing you need to have installed is the box binary, which I say install. Just throw it on your desktop. There's no installation. It just sits there. The box binary, box.exe on Windows, and just box for Unix. And you need to have Java of some version 7 or higher and less than 9 now. By the way, don't use Java 9 yet. You do need to have Java installed on your machine. Other than that, you don't need IIS, you don't need Apache, you don't need Nginx, you don't need Tomcat, you don't need Cold Fusion, you don't need Lucy, you don't need anything else installed. You just need Box, and you run Box start. And you have a server. That's it. That's all you need to do. It'll even open the browser window for you and stick a little icon down the system tray. It really doesn't get any easier than that. You can choose the port you want it to start on. You can choose HTTPS if you want that enabled. You can turn on rewriting, which, I mean, that's a total pain normally, and it's different for every, for Apache, for Nginx, for IIS. You can enable rewrites with just a simple flag in the command line. The heap size, how much RAM you want it to use, as well as the engine you want it to use. I want it to be Adobe 11. I want it to be Adobe 2016. I want it to be Lucy 5. CommandBox will download anything it needs on the fly when it starts the server the first time and cache it. You don't have to deal with the Adobe, download page or finding the right Lucy, URL to download stuff. we've taken care of that for you. So you can start as many servers as you want, in as many versions as you want, and it's a separate process for each server. It's kind of a containerized mindset where instead of having a big giant fat, Adobe ColdFusion 11 installation on your machine with a bunch of different web routes all pointing at different files, if you want to have 5 sites running, that's fine. You run box start 5 different times in 5 different directories, and you have 5 little small processes running whatever version of ColdFusion or Lucy you want on whatever ports you want. And they're all running as their own little thing. You can stop and start them individually. This is a very good mindset to get into to move things towards microservices. The idea of having little small containerized pieces of functionality you can just stick out on Docker Swarm or something like that. We support pretty much every ColdFusion engine in existence. Adobe 9, 10, 11, 12. We also have some super secret support for the Adobe pre-release, but you only get to use that if you're on the Adobe pre-release. Lucy 4, Lucy 5, even Rilo. I even tried Blue Dragon once on it just for the heck of it, and it worked. You can just grab the WAR file and start it. Every time an update comes out for Lucy or Adobe ColdFusion, we update our engines. So if you're using CommandBox for your local development and Adobe comes out with a new updater, we add the new updater on ForgeBox. The next time you start your engine, the next time you start your server, CommandBox will be like, oh, hey, new version, give me a second, downloading, caching. Okay, there's your server. You don't have to worry about upgrading your server or manually doing that kind of stuff. CommandBox knows what the current version is. It'll download the new ones if you want. You can also do custom wars as well, like Jenkins, for instance. If you want to run a local Jenkins installation, you can just grab jenkins.war off their website and start it directly. Is running microservices like that recommended for an enterprise production environment, or are you talking about just for development? Both. It's absolutely recommended for enterprise production environments or just for development, whatever you want. Okay, so configuration-wise, and good question, David. You can ask more questions if you have them. You can choose your ports, HTTP, HTTPS. If you don't give CommandBox support, we will randomly choose one for you. That way, you're guaranteed your servers won't conflict with anything else you have running on the machine. So if you want to start up every version of Adobe that's ever existed since 9 to test your site against, we'll pick 4 or 5 random ports and we'll start them all on there. Or if you want a specific port, you can tell us and we'll use it. There's a really cool module I didn't stick in my slides that Chris Schmitz made called the Host Updater module. And we ripped it off from the Vagrant Host Updater module. And it's really nice because it'll automatically edit your host file. It's compatible on Linux, Windows, and Mac. It'll edit your host file automatically, stick the host name that you want to use, which you can just totally make up, like mycoolsite.local. It'll add it to your host file, and it'll point it to a 127 address. And that means you can actually run all your local sites on port 80 because they'll all point to a different 127 address. That's pretty handy for local development. You can do SSL certs, and you can choose the port number you want to bind to. Any JVM settings are fully configurable. CommandBox runs on top of JBoss Undertow, which is part of the Wildfly project, and it's a programmatically configured servlet engine. And so you have full access to any JVM arguments you want to pass in, heap size, any of those JVM settings, Java agents, debuggers, system properties, all that stuff you can specify in CommandBox. So this brings us to server.json. You can do pretty much anything you want with a CommandBox server. The next question is sort of orchestration of that server. How do you share this server with all of your coworkers? A super common issue with developers is they want to do local development. There's 5, 10, maybe just 2 people on a development team, and they want to have identical servers locally. So how do you make sure that your server matches the guy's server sitting next to you, especially if you're on Windows and he's on Mac, right? The way to make everything in your server portable regarding the actual engine and the ports is to stick this information on a server.json file. This can be even committed to your repository. And if you run the server start command in a folder that has a server.json file, CommandBox will look for that file. It'll read the file. It'll suck all the settings out of the file, and it'll use them when it starts the server. So here's an example on the slide of a server.json that would be called my server. It would use Adobe Cold Fusion 2016, latest version. It would run on port 8000. It would have URL rewrites enabled, and it would have a 1 gig heap size. You can distribute your code with this server.json file in the root to a new developer. First day on their job, all they have to do is download CommandBox and run box start in the folder, and boom, brand new PC is now running the code using all the settings that everybody else on the team is using. A quick note on these Adobe Cold Fusion, or not just Adobe, on these CF engines in general, Lucy, Adobe, you name it. If you do CF engine equals just Lucy or just Adobe with no version, we'll just start the latest and greatest version of that engine, right? So, CF engine equals Lucy would be Lucy 5 to whatever the heck it is now, right? In fact, if you're ever curious, what are the available engines? We can use the ForgeBox show command, and we can just show these packages right off of ForgeBox. So latest version of Lucy is 5.2.4.37. Same thing for Adobe. What's the latest version of Adobe servers? 2016 update 5, 11 update 13, 10 update 23, right? You can get to all that from the command line, which is nice. So you can specify as much of the version number as you want. So in this instance here on my slide, Adobe at 2016, it would get the latest update of 2016. If you want to lock your code into a very specific version, maybe you work at an institution that says, oh man, you can't upgrade anything until it's, been fully regression tested. All right, whatever. You can specify the exact version, Adobe at 2016.0.3, and you wouldn't go past update or 3. So you have full control over that. Just want to make that clear. Okay. There's a second level of settings, everything that I just talked about that you can put in your server.json file, which is nice and portable, you can set globally on your local CommandBox installation as a config setting. So if every server that you start, you just want them to all be Adobe 2016 by default, as opposed to what would right now be Lucy 4.5 by default, you can override that at a global setting. That way when you're just testing, screwing around, spinning up servers in random directories, shutting them down, you can say, I always want it to be with rewrites enabled. I always want to have a heap size of 1 gig. I always want to be on Adobe 2016. And that can be at a global level. You'd manage those with config set, config show, and config clear. So the order that settings are used is the parameters you pass into the CLI, the values in server.json, and your global config settings in CommandBox. So for instance, if you start a server and the CommandBox says, what port should the server be started on? It first looks and sees, did you type in a port as a parameter to the start command, start port equals? If so, it uses it right off the bat. If not, it says, okay, fall back to server.json. Is there a server.json, and does it have a port specified in it? If so, use it. If not, fall back again. Are there global config settings on this CommandBox installation? And if so, does that have a global port to use? If so, use it. Else, fall back to pick a random port. So that's the order those go in, and you can mix and match and combine these to customize your local environment. There's a couple, most settings are overrides. There's a couple special settings like JVM arguments or lib directories that are cumulative. That means if you want a certain JVM arg to just be added to every single server ever in the world, you can set that as a global config setting. But then if you also have some real specific JVM args in one setting in the server.json file, it'll add the two together, and it'll use the combination of your global JVM args in your server.json. So it's good to know about a couple of those little caveats there. When you're managing servers, you can have as many servers as you want. File system paths are resolved as follows. Whenever you start a server from the command line, start, rewrite config, right? So if I do, path to file.xml, right? That is going to be resolved relative to the working directory that I'm running the command in, which should be what you would naturally expect from pretty much any command line tool. So I'm currently sitting at my desktop in the shell, and so it would look for a directory path to file starting at the desktop. Any paths, any relative paths that are in the server.json are resolved relative to wherever the server.json file lives. Now you might think, well, don't I always start the server from the root of the web server, and doesn't the server.json file always live in the root of the web server? And the answer is no and no. You can actually start a server from anywhere you want on your hard drive by name or by path. You can also store your server.json outside of the web root if you want to have a custom setup or a more secure setup. So if you have a server.json file sitting in some subdirectory, right? Any relative paths are going to be relative to wherever it is that server.json file lives. And if you have any global settings, config settings stored in CommandBox that are relative, they are going to be resolved relative to whatever the web root of the server is that you're starting. And of course, you can always have absolute paths, but if you're wanting to have a portable configuration that you share between all of your coworkers, then you're going to want to avoid absolute paths. You'll want a little self-contained server where everything's relative. Okay, so once you start managing and starting servers with CommandBox, you'll find it so quick and so easy to spin up a new server. You'll do it all the time. When I would help people on the ColdBox mailing list, I used to have a specific server installed that was Lucy, and I would go and I would start that server, and I would wipe out the files in the web root, and I'd put in the files I wanted to test. And frankly, it kind of sucked. Now, whenever I want to, help someone on Slack or the mailing list, and I want to play around with a ColdBox application, let's say, with the particular configuration that they're using, I just create a new folder anywhere that I want, use the ColdBox scaffolding commands to throw some code into it, and I just run start. I just spin up a brand new server right in that folder. I can play around with it, try some stuff. When I'm done, I stop the server, and I just forget it. There's a server forget command that actually erases the files from all the the engine installation off your hard drive. So you'll end up with a number of servers, and so you can reference them by name. You can also have multiple servers inside the same code base. So let's say your application you have checked out from Git or SVN, and you want to be able to spin it up in Lucy, and you want to be able to spin it up in Adobe 11. Maybe you're converting from one to the other. You can create more than one server.json file in the same directory with different names. Server.json is just the default name for the file. You can really call it whatever you want. So you could have a Lucy server.json file and an Adobe server.json file with different settings in each of them. And you can tell CommandBox, I want you to start this server.json, or I want you to start that server.json. You can also list and manage the servers. I actually blew away my CommandBox installation yesterday, and I actually don't think I have any servers to list. Server list. No, there's literally nothing on this machine right now. If you run server list, it'll show you all the previous servers you've started along with their name. And pretty much all the server commands, server start, server stop, server status, server restart, server log, server forget, all of these commands you can either run from the web root of the server in question, or you can pass into them as their first parameter the name of the server you would like to act upon. So if we look at the server restart command, you can see the very first parameter is the name of the server you want to start. So if I have a server called foo and a server called bar and random folders on my hard drive, I can type server start foo, server stop bar, server restart foo. And I can do that from any directory. I can reference them by name, which is pretty handy. There's also a server cd command, which is really convenient. You guys are all familiar with the cd command, change directory. What you'll find yourself doing if you're switching back and forth between multiple projects is you'll want to take your CommandBox shell and switch to the web root of another server, which may be somewhere else on a different drive. And that can be a lot of typing, or you have to open it up in Explorer and copy the URL out. It's kind of a pain. So the server cd command allows you to quickly and easily change into the directory that's the web root of a server based on the server's name. So server cd my server number 17 will change your current working directory over to the web root of my server 17, right? That's a handy little command once you get a number of servers you're dealing with. Let me just start up a server real quick. It kind of sucks that I have no servers started to get a little more useful information. Let's create ODW2017 folder. I'm just going to throw a CommandBox app into it because, hey, why not? CommandBox. Yay, CommandBox. And we'll start up a server using default settings, which in this case should be Lucy 4.5. All right, we'll talk about the next slide while that starts. There's a bunch of additional settings. We talked about some of the basic things like port, JVM arguments, things like that. No, actually started up faster than I thought it would. My laptop is extremely slow, especially when I do screen share. You see the browser window opening up happens automatically. Just it's something CommandBox does when your server starts. Of course, you can turn that off if you don't like it. If you can see down here on the bottom, I have a little icon that's appeared. It's the Lucy icon. That's because it's Lucy 4.5. When you click on this, you have some nice little options like stop the server, open the browser, open the server administrator, right? Nice little shortcuts. In this case, it's a Lucy server, so it opens up the Lucy administrator. Here's my little CommandBox site that we started. So now that I've actually started a server, if I run things like server list, you see that you can see the server there. If I run server info, you can get some information on the current server, like the version, the last time I started it, the last message. So a lot of information there. Okay, so there's a bunch of other stuff you can specify in your server.json file. One of our goals for CommandBox was to make it as much as possible a drop-in replacement for your entire local development stack. Now, CommandBox isn't just for development. You can actually use it in production. Nowadays, we have things like Docker images, Heroku build packs. We have people running Lucy and Adobe Cold Fusion on production on CommandBox right now. But it started out with more just development in mind. And the idea was to replace all that junk you had to do with IIS and Apache and Tomcat and stuff. So CommandBox, in addition to having the ability to start any Cold Fusion engine, CFML engine, also has quite a few sort of this web server features. So one would be web aliases. These are called virtual directories in IIS. They're called aliases in Apache. Everybody has their own names for them. But you can tell CommandBox in this instance you want /bar to point to the directory called foo, right? So that's something you can do. You can create custom error pages. So if you want to have a custom 404 page or a custom 500 error page, you can also configure that in CommandBox the same way you would in IIS or Apache. In case you're wondering, you can point to a static page or a .cfm file, which that can be kind of handy. To be honest, I've done that in the past, in years past with IIS for like a poor man's URL rewriting, as I would just have my 404 file would point to a dynamic CFM file that would do something on the fly. You can also totally customize these little menu items down here. So when you right click these items that show up, you can add and remove from the items in that list. And I have a slide for this later, but let me just do it now. CommandBox Fusion Reactor. So let's say if you use Fusion Reactor, I don't have my license key in here, so I should be able to do anything with it. But if you want to use Fusion Reactor with your servers, literally all you need to do is write as typed, which is install CommandBox-Fusion Reactor. Now, if I restart my server, and restart just executes a stop followed by a start. It's downloading Fusion Reactor right now. Automatically, this is the world's easiest and quickest way to experiment with Fusion Reactor. Every server I start on this laptop will now have Fusion Reactor enabled. Of course, with the caveat that you need to have a license or a trial if you actually expect to use it. I just made a screencast a couple weeks ago on using Fusion Reactor Cloud with CommandBox, and I did a demo with Docker Swarm, which is actually pretty cool. So as soon as this comes back up, we'll see an example of custom menu items. This can be handy if you're wanted to do like a standalone, CommandBox server that's like distributable on a USB drive or something like that, a thumb drive, and you want to have a custom tray icon for it. You can customize the icon as well as the menus that pop up. It can also just be handy for you know, you and your coworkers, let's say you have a certain URL for an admin screen that's unique to your app, and you want to add a menu item in so your junior developers can just right-click on the tray icon and have a custom link. Ed asked about that. Are you talking about that the screencast that I made? Allow me to commandeer a Chrome window. I closed all my spare windows. Actually, I will just go. I blogged it on the Order Solutions blog. So you can add whatever you want into that menu. Un momento. Blog. Here we go. Screencast intro to Fusion Reactor, Cloud, and Docker Swarm. Super cool. Where'd my chat window go? Here it is. What? Somebody beat me. How dare you? Yeah. Okay. So check this out now. When I click on the icon for my server, not only do I have stop server, open browser, blah, 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 look, there's a new item. It's called Open Fusion Reactor. And it even has the little Fusion Reactor logo on it. Isn't that cute? So what happened is when I installed that Fusion Reactor module, like 2 seconds ago prior to restarting my server, it listens for every time a server starts. This is a totally third-party standalone module, right? It listens for every server that starts. It injects all the JVM arguments necessary to spin up Fusion Reactor, and it injects a new menu item into the little right-click thing. So you can add whatever the heck you want into this list. So you can add your own little link that says, you know, open our custom company portal, right? And it'll open up a URL of your choosing. So you can just customize the crap out of this thing. Here's the Fusion Reactor page. Obviously, I don't have my license key pumped in here right now. It is just a single command, add your license key if you do. So the custom menus are kind of cool. Okay, so we're almost to CF config. Gotta keep hurrying. So a brief slide about what CommandBox isn't, just so everyone's aware. It's not 110% exactly the same as your production setup, unless you're using something like the CommandBox-based or the Docker images in production, in which case it's about 99% the same. It's not a database. That's one thing we don't have, but it's interesting to know. We do have some community-created MariaDB modules for CommandBox. Jan Janik has worked on some stuff. And we also have, like for instance, in Lucy, there's the embedded H2 database. On Adobe servers, you get the Apache Derby database. So if you're thinking in your mind, like, man, I could make a standalone website and a thumb drive that someone can just pop into a laptop and double-click something, yeah, you can do that, and you'll need to think about how you want the database to work. But you do have options, things like H2 that's embedded and file-based. CommandBox is not a virtual machine, obviously, so it's not quite like Vagrant if you have like super duper specific requirements on how it needs to be built and how it needs to be run. CommandBox does not afford you the isolation of a complete virtual machine. It's just a process that starts. It's also by default not a service that that starts when your computer boots up, which is what you're kind of used to with the typical Cold Fusion installers. However, that said, you can totally make CommandBox boot when your server starts. And George Murphy just did a presentation on this like 2 days ago or 3 days ago in Orders Developer Week. So we already had the recording up on that. So you can definitely do a lot of these things, but it doesn't do all of them out of the box. But it's good to know what those limitations are. I showed you guys a Fusion Reactor module earlier. This is just one of several examples of CommandBox modules that add additional functionality to the CLI. It adds commands like FR register, FR open. It contributes icons to the little system tray. Contributes menu items to a little pop-up in the system tray, and it contributes behavior to the servers as they start. A couple interesting notes here. The first one is offline server starts. Since CommandBox does a lot of this whole, download and install as necessary sort of stuff, which is, part of the convenience, hey, start an Adobe Cold Fusion 11 server. All right, I'll download some crap and get it started for you. If you want to use CommandBox at 30,000 feet on an airplane and you don't want to pay United for their Wi-Fi, then you can work around that. if you can prevent CommandBox from checking the internet to try to see, Adam Rosen, is there a document listed on the box.json potential params? Yes, there's two things you can do. The first thing you can do is you can go to the command line. Oops, come on, command line. Where's my cursor? Oh, sorry. You can go to the command line and you can type package set, which is the command you can use to save things into your JSON, and hit the tab key. And you will see everything that we have auto completion for, right? And that also works as you type. You said box.json. I don't know if you meant box.json or server.json. The exact same thing is for server set, which is how you manipulate your server.json. Hit tab and you'll see the tab completion on everything that's possible. That's the quick and dirty answer. The slightly longer answer is to grab our web browser back again. I failed to give you guys the link to the docs up top. Commandbox.ortusbooks.com is the link to our documentation. We also had that linked on the Ortus Solution product page for CommandBox. And there are two pages in here that are analogous to what I just showed you. Under package management, we have box.json, which has a sample box.json, and it has some comments in here that show you what every single one of these box.json properties does, as well as I have broken out help sections for every single thing in box.json. And if you really meant server.json, look under embedded server and server.json, and you'll see I have the exact same page, everything possible for server.json. So I mean, there's stuff I didn't even put in my slides, like default welcome files, right? SSL cert files, basic authentication, and I have a slide for that, right? And in addition to this page right here, there's also individual help pages as well. Like I want to run my server on Java 7, but my default installation is Java 8. Boom, I got a whole page for that. So yeah, it's all in the docs. If you can find a question that's not answered by reading the docs, then you have a good question. Okay, so offline server starts. When you start a server and you say, give me Lucy 5, CommandBox will dial up ForgeBox. Hey, ForgeBox, what's the latest version of Lucy 5 that you have, right? And ForgeBox says, well, I'm glad you asked. It's 5.2. Blah, blah, right? To which CommandBox says, okay, great. Hey, Artifact Service, do we have that one downloaded yet? Oh, we have it? Okay, great, right? If you want to X that whole conversation, you don't want any network chatter happening, then specify an exact version of the engine. So if you do, start CF engine equals Lucy, I'm using tab completion here, Lucy at 5.1, totally making this up as I go, tab, there's quite a few versions, 0.31. Okay, so if I give it a like, is that even, no, that's right, I'm missing a value, aren't I? 5.1. This is harder than it looks, guys. Jeez. Doesn't help when I have numlock turned off on my keypad. Okay, so if I start with a very specific version of Lucy that specifies, major, minor, patch, build, all that stuff, that whole hey ForgeBox conversation doesn't even happen because there's no ambiguity. You told it exactly what to start. And so CommandBox will just go straight to saying, hey, Artifact Service, do you have this downloaded? If you don't have it downloaded, then it's going to try to download it from the internet. But there's some fail safes in place. If you ask for Lucy 5.2, right, point blah, 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 but it's not locally in artifacts, and then it tries to go to the internet and download it, but the internet just blows up, right? You're offline, ForgeBox is down for the moment, right? Then it's really, really smart and tries really, really hard, and then goes back to the artifact service, and it's like, maybe it said just give me some version of Lucy 5. It'll say, do you have any other version that's maybe not the latest, but like that will still satisfy the version number? And if it can find a version in local artifacts that will still satisfy the version you asked for, it'll still use it. So CommandBox will try really, really hard to work even if your internet is down. So all this stuff gets cached in your artifacts directory. By default, this is going to be in your local user directory. Whoa, I just clicked something. No, go away. I don't know what you want to do. So for me, it's C users Brad.commandbox, right? This is where CommandBox lives. In this artifacts directory, this is all the stuff that you've ever installed before, and it caches it so it never has to download it again. So if you ever are like just wiping out your local CommandBox installation, I always leave that artifacts directory because that thing can be like gigabytes in size if you've been downloading all sorts of crap. And that'll make it so the next time you start, you'll still have all the stuff downloaded. Evagora says, are we out of luck if we need to run our sites through IIS, or is there a cool box way of wiring things that automatically? It depends on what you need. If you truly need something that's only available on IIS, you're not out of luck. You can use either an AJP proxy, which is supported as a first-class citizen in 3.9, or you can just use a reverse HTTP proxy. You can put CommandBox behind a web server. You can totally get away with that. My goal is you don't have to. Let me know if there's something very specific to IIS that you're interested in, and we can see what it would take to add it. Ed says, can you request Lucy version 55162? Are you asking if I can request a version that's not already on ForgeBox? I need you to clarify your question, Ed. Adam says, can an artifact be corrupted? Not the most current. Yeah, I mean, you can specify any version that's on ForgeBox, right? So remember earlier when we did, ForgeBox show Lucy, right? There's all kinds of versions of Lucy in the 5 series and the 4 series, and you can specify any of them. So I can do start CF engine Lucy at 4.5.4. Whoops. Right, and that's what I was doing earlier. So, I mean, I can dial it in, and I can say, give me this exact version of Lucy. Who cares if it's 5 years old? And as long as it's on ForgeBox, CommandBox will happily download it and will start it for you. So, I mean, that's kind of the whole point here. I mean, you can start, literally any version you want. I mean, and if you really, 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 really want, you can make your own custom versions of engines. It's not even that hard. I mean, if you have some, just insane, crazy requirements, you want to have a custom Adobe War, go for it, right? Okay, so Adam, can your artifacts cache become corrupted? Yes, it's possible. A lot of things are possible. So let me show you some artifacts commands. Artifacts list, right? I recently blew away CommandBox on my local laptop, so I don't have a lot of artifacts. I ran this command on my PC earlier today, and I have just hundreds and hundreds of them. Artifacts list will show you everything in the artifacts cache. If we do artifacts help, you can see there's an artifacts remove command and an artifacts clean command. So you can come in and you can do artifacts remove. Let's look at the help for this. You can give it the name of the package you want, and it'll delete all the versions for that package, or you can give it a package and a version, and it will delete only that version for only that package. So you can, or to go full circle, you can do artifacts clean, and it'll blow all the artifacts away. It'll just nuke the entire directory. So that's how you would recover if you ever managed to get a corrupted artifact in there. I hope I answered the question. Okay, great questions, guys. I think I've covered them all. Okay, so the artifacts directory is useful. Keep it around if you can. And you can seed the artifacts directory. Like if you have a Travis CI build, Travis CI lets you cache certain directories. It'll back them up to S3 before and after the builds. You can have it back up your entire artifacts directory so it doesn't download stuff. Okay, so we try to be as absolutely fault tolerant. So I'm just now getting to halfway through my slides with 10 minutes left. So kick it into high gear. So we've talked about a bunch of configuration options, right? The ability to have a folder with code and a server.json, and you distribute it to your coworkers via source control. They run start, and the entire server, comes into fruition with all the settings that you want. But all the settings we've talked about are just choosing the specifics of the engine you want to start with, or configuring the JVM, or configuring the application server, configuring the web server. There's a whole aspect of settings we haven't talked about, and those are the settings that you configure through the web-based administrator, the ColdFusion administrator, the Lucy administrator. So these are things like data sources, mail servers. This kind of stuff, you want to be able to share that as well with your coworkers. And this is where CFconfig comes in. This allows you to import configuration into a server, to export configuration out of a server, to run diffs on 2 different servers, or maybe a server and a JSON file, or 2 different JSON files, right, to see what's different. Transfer configuration from point A to point B, which is really the same as import and export. And also just view the configuration on a server holistically or individually, and set the configuration into a server, right? CFconfig currently supports Adobe 11, 2016, preliminary support for the 2018 pre-release. Shh, that's only for people on the pre-release. Lucy 4, Lucy 5. There's others that are possible, but we need community contribution. I've had a couple people ask me, 3 I think, about like Adobe 9. To be really honest, I don't care enough about Adobe 9 to add support for it, but it really wouldn't be that hard. I've had 3 people tell me they would contribute support. I'm still waiting for the pull request. I have gotten some pull requests, though, on CFconfig, which is awesome. I love that. So this is what CFconfig is. This is not part of CommandBox, Adobe 8. No. I'm not even, geez. Well, that wouldn't be too hard. Adobe's kept the same basic XML format for the configuration since 6. Which was codenamed Neo, and all the files were Neo hyphen. It's been the same basic format since then. CFconfig's not part of CommandBox out of the box. Maybe someday it will be. Right now, it's a separate project, and it comes in 2 main pieces, as detailed here. It's a really satisfying little image. I never put this all together until this today before the session. So it has the core service layer, which is available as a separate package on CommandBox, on ForgeBox. Right, that in theory you could use directly outside of a CLI. It has the list of base configuration items, which is all the individual settings, that you can view and set. It has base support for Adobe and Lucy, and that's mostly because most versions of Adobe use pretty much the same configuration format, and most versions of Lucy use pretty much the same configuration format. And then I have concrete classes that implement the specific support for ColdFusion 11. Lucy 5, Lucy 4, and they inherit up the chain, so it's as little to code duplication as possible. There's the service layer, there's support for property files, password encryption, JSON formatting, semantic versioning, right? All that's wrapped up in the service layer. And when the service layer is wrapped in the CommandBox CLI, this provides the CLI commands to access all that service layer from the command line, as well as interceptors that listen to things that servers do, and some helper utilities. So I just looked today, and there's almost 150 separate configuration items supported. And by separate configuration item, I basically mean every little individual checkbox and text box in the ColdFusion web-based administrator. Every little thing you can tick or select or type into has an equivalent setting in CFconfig. So this includes data sources, custom tags, mail servers, caches, request timeouts, security settings, kind of anything in the UI. And of course, a single data source has like 40 different fields that can be associated with it. There's a lot of stuff, especially in Adobe ColdFusion. So CFconfig lets us read and write from or to a JSON file, a CommandBox server, or any server installation, regardless of how it was installed, as long as you can access it via the file system. Can you have all one config file shared by all your servers? Yeah, you can do that. We'll talk about that in a second. The JSON file, this is where it gets really beautiful. The JSON file is engine/version agnostic, right? So when you export the settings out of a Lucy 4 server into a JSON file, those settings have nothing at all to do with Lucy 4. It's just the raw basic settings, which means you can then import those settings from the JSON file into an Adobe 11 server, right? All the same data sources, mail servers, requests, things just can flow from one engine to the other. And CFconfig talks both languages. It translates them as necessary. I mean, you can get diffs on settings between an Adobe 2016 and an Adobe 11 server. And CFconfig is smart enough to know how to read the settings on each of those engines, all the little intricacies that might be different between those 2 versions. So the fact that the JSON file is generic is really nice, because that makes your settings even more portable and even more reusable and less brittle. Because if you're copying XML files around, which is especially popular right now in Docker, right? Copying XML files around, I mean, is that going to work on the next version of Lucy? You don't know, right? But copying a generic JSON file around and asking cfconfig, will you please import this appropriately into Lucy 5, right? That's super portable. The base commands are cfconfig set, show, export, import, transport, transfer, and diff. So if I run, by the way, I installed this module earlier, right before the session started. Install CommandBox. Sorry, I'm hitting tab completion -cfconfig. My goodness, there's a lot of packages start with CommandBox hyphen, right? So that's what you do to install it. Install CommandBox cfconfig. And in case you're curious, you can use the list command with a system flag, and you can actually see it installed into the guts of CommandBox. So that this diagram a few slides back, this is kind of like a representation of all those pieces that assemble, right? Shortcut. Okay, so, oh, that's right. So cfconfig, we have a whole series of commands that are now registered with my CLI as part of the module. So I can run cfconfig show, and holy cow, there's all kinds of junk. Oh, look, logger support. This is the first time I've used it since this. Awesome. Who did this? John Burquest sent me a pull request this week actually to add support for Lucy's loggers. That's awesome. I haven't actually even tested it yet. I merged his pull. It looked pretty good. So you can see these are all the settings for my Lucy server. There's not a great deal in here. Most just defaults, right? You know, the request timeout is 50 seconds, set client cookies, scope cascading, you know, all the stuff in here. You can view individual settings, cfconfig show, request. Actually, if you hit tab, by the way, 149 possibilities, right? Isn't that nice? You're welcome. All right, cfconfig show request timeout. There we go. I love tab completion. Right, so you can view individual settings on a server. Now, I mentioned 2 slides ago, 3 slides ago. My goodness, how many slides ago did I mention this? Oh, here we go. cfconfig can interact with JSON files, CommandBox servers, or any server installation. So in this particular instance, I'm interacting with a CommandBox server. So I'm running my cfconfig commands from the web root of my CommandBox server. And cfconfig is smart enough that when I run cfconfig show request timeout, cfconfig looks around and says, what folder am I in? Hey, is this the web root of a server? Oh, sweet. I'll just go ahead and just use the server that I'm currently running the commands in. However, if you have a traditionally installed Adobe or Lucy server on your machine or accessible via UNC directory network shares, you can point cfconfig commands at a remote directory and say, hey, go read the configuration out of this directory. It'll look in the directory, it'll figure out, what is this, Adobe, Lucy? Okay, it'll figure out the version to the best it can. But in these examples, I'm just running this from the web root of my server. So you can set things the same way, cfconfig set request time out equals, 0 days, 0 hours, 5 minutes, and 0 seconds, right? So that actually just wrote my changes into the XML files inside of my Lucy server. I would need to restart the server right now for it to take effect. But there is a setting in both Adobe and Lucy, even though it's hidden, most people don't know about it, that will reload the settings automatically from disk, which is pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. Okay, so config set, config show, config export will extract settings out of a server, import will import settings into a server, transfers from moving from one server to another, dirty secret, export and import, both actually called transfer behind the scenes because it's all just moving it from point A to point B. cfconfig diff, darn it, I can't use it unless I have 2 servers to actually diff. All right, let's try this. cfconfig export cfconfig.json. Okay, so I just extracted all of, here, I'll show you this. I just extracted all the settings from my server out into this text file, right? This is the JSON that represents everything on my server. So let's go open up my Lucy administrator. Come on, Lucy. What are you doing? There we go. We will let ourselves in. And let's actually let's start by seeing if it even shows the same. I'm curious how these loggers are going to behave. If we do cfconfig diff, so from server to server, so we'll diff it to the JSON file I just extracted. If I can type it cfconfig.json, hey, it's all green. Looks like these loggers show us different. I have to look into that. That's a brand new feature. So if I go in now and I change something, what should I change? Performance caching. Let's turn on trusted cache, or the equivalent of what Lucy calls it, inspect templates. So now my server should be different from the JSON file that I exported a couple minutes ago. So if I do diff values differ, oh, it doesn't show up. What is the meaning of this? It should have shown that as the difference between the two of them. Oh, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. The reason it didn't show up is because I told the command to only show me values that were different in the two locations, but the inspect template setting did not exist in one location. So it was technically not a different value. It was a value that only existed in one location. Sort of a technicality. I hate it when the computer's technically right and I'm wrong. So here we go. So inspect template is different. It is set to never in one location, and it was simply not set at all in the other location. So that's our diff command. So you can diff between any two things. Is it possible to upgrade Lucy extensions with CommandBox? No, it is not. Thanks for asking. Okay, cfconfig commands. I'm joking, but I'm serious. That's a whole discussion. Let's talk about it later, Renee. There's ways to automatically install Lucy extensions. None of them are incredibly good, but there's nothing built into CommandBox or cfconfig right now, and I'd like to keep it that way, but we can talk about what the options are there. Complex settings like data sources, CF mappings, mail servers, and caches. Caches are specific to Lucy. Mail servers are more or less specific to Lucy. Well, not really. In Adobe, you typically get one mail server. Lucy lets you have any number of mail servers. There's dedicated commands for these. So if I go into my administrator and I create a ColdFusion mapping called foo, and it points to my C drive, I can manage that mapping from the command line by saying cfconfig cf mappings list, right? And here's that mapping. So all of those sort of complex settings where you have a bunch of little text boxes that all comprise one form work like this. So you can also do cfconfig cf mapping save, right? I can manage these from the command line. So I can save a mapping with a virtual path of bar, and it'll also point to the C drive because I'm exceedingly lazy. And if we do CF mapping list, we can see that I've added my ColdFusion mapping in /bar. If I was to restart my server, that change would be picked up in the Lucy administrators as well. Okay. I showed individual settings. I showed these guys. Okay, so password support. The passwords for Adobe ColdFusion administrators and Lucy ColdFusion administrators are hashed. That means they're irreversible, and cfconfig can transfer them between like servers, but I cannot export an Adobe ColdFusion 11 administrator password into a Lucy administrator because they use different hashing algorithms, right? However, mail server passwords, data source passwords, and key store passwords can be transferred anywhere. Those are encrypted, which means they're decryptable. So cfconfig will decrypt your data source and mail server passwords from the server it's coming from, and it'll re-encrypt them using the appropriate encryption mechanism for the server it's being transferred into. So you can transfer data sources from Adobe to Lucy, and your servers will be re-encrypted in the appropriate format when they go in, right? Another question from Renee, is this limited to servers which were started in CommandBox? No, it's not, and I had that on a previous slide. You can use cfconfig on any Cold Fusion server regardless of how it was installed, right? Remember I mentioned that I'm running these commands in the web root? Cfconfig show, well actually let me just show you in the docs. The docs for CommandBox are commandbox.ordisbooks.com. The docs for cfconfig are cfconfig.ordisbooks.com. You can use cfconfig on any server. You just need to point to the installation. So if you want to use it on the web context of a Lucy server, then you need to point it to the folder containing the Lucy web.xml.cfm file, which would typically be like webinf/Lucy. If you want to use it on a server context, you would need to point it to wherever the heck the context/Lucy server.xml file lives, which an example on Linux would probably be installed there. If you want to use it on pretty much any version of Cold Fusion, you need to point it to the C Fusion directory, wherever it is that the lib/Neil runtime XML lives. And of course, to use it on a JSON file, you just point it to the JSON file. So any server installed via any mechanism available on any file system, you can point cfconfig at and you can say go. So here's how it works. If I, here we go. Well, let me do this one, cfconfig transfer, right? Every single cfconfig command has a from parameter and or a to parameter, as well as an accompanying from format parameter and or to format parameter. That's just static across all the commands. And they're named generically because from or to can either be the name of the CommandBox server you want it to act upon, or it can be the path on the file system to where the server is installed. Or you leave it out and we just use the current working directory, right? And then the from format and to format, that's only if you need to tell us what engine it is we're using, if we can't figure it out on our own. So yes, you can do whatever the heck you want with that. So passwords. cfconfig is smart enough, it'll decrypt your passwords, it'll re-encrypt them whenever it needs to. There's a note on this though, your passwords will show in the JSON file. So if I go into, let's do mail server. If I go into my mail server and where's my mail server? Oh, here we go. And I say, localhost, geez, I can't type it. And my username is my username, and my password is my password. I don't even know if I typed that correctly. It's encrypted when it's stored in the XML files. However, what? Oh, you want a port? I don't know. What's the default SMTP port? I guess it would be POP3. Doesn't matter. So if I go here and I do cfconfig show, geez, we need to find it. Let's see if we can grep it out. There we go. So the password for the mail server is here, and you can see it's plain text, my password. So if you have super duper secret passwords on your data sources, mail servers, any of that nonsense, just know that cfconfig is going to store those in plain text in the JSON file. Keep that in mind if this is a public project or your company has any requirements on passwords and JSON files. There's a way around that, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, even though I realize I'm going over my hour. Sorry, not sorry. So cfconfig interceptors. This is some of the things that make cfconfig really start to sparkle and be useful. In addition to all these commands we've been talking about, where you as a programmer can say, import that, export this, transfer that, cfconfig, when installed into a CommandBox server, is capable of doing things automatically, which is especially nice since our Ortus Docker images are based on CommandBox. So all this cool stuff that cfconfig does is just baked right into our Docker images. We include cfconfig for you. So when you start a server with CommandBox, if you have a file called .cfconfig.json in the web root of that server, cfconfig will just automatically import it for you by convention. We started it with a period because a lot of web servers like Apache and things won't serve files that start with a dot by default, slightly secure, right? You can override that by specifying the path in your server.json. You can create a cfconfig file parameter in your server.json, and you can say, here's the file I want loaded, and it lives here outside of my web root, right? When you start that CommandBox server, it'll just automatically import those settings for you. Or if you want to be really cool, you can specify an environment variable in your operating system called cfconfig file that contains the absolute path to wherever the heck it is that JSON file exists. And when the server starts, cfconfig will just automatically import those settings for you. There's also the ability to auto-transfer previous server settings whenever you upgrade. And this was actually the original idea that kind of sparked cfconfig. When you install Lucy, 5.1, when you start a server, and the next week Lucy 5.2 comes out, and you wake up one day and you start your server, CommandBox says, oh, hey, there's a new version of Lucy, I'm downloading that for you, it starts it up, and all your settings are gone. And people are like, where are my settings, right? Because every server that CommandBox starts is its own little separate compartmentalized folder, and all your settings aren't in the new folder. So cfconfig is smart enough that whenever you start an engine for the first time and you started another lesser version of that same engine in that same folder in the past, cfconfig will just automatically transfer all your old settings over. So this just makes it a seamless experience now. You wake up one day, a new version of Lucy or Adobe's dropped, and you didn't even care. You just type server start, the server starts up, it downloads some new junk, and all your settings just follow right along to the new version of the folder, and you didn't even know a difference, right? That was really the whole reason that I started thinking about cfconfig. There's also an optional setting, it's disabled by default, that'll allow you to automatically save your settings every time the server stops. This can be useful if you and all your coworkers are sharing the same settings in a config.json file, and you're maybe committing it to the repository or something. Whenever you go into the administrator, you manually make some changes, and you stop the CommandBox server, you can have it automatically just export right out to that JSON file. That way the JSON file is always in sync with what you have in the administrator. Okay, we're almost done. This is where it starts to get nice and dynamic. I talked about those passwords earlier. Some of you people might have been thinking, I don't want to have passwords, right? You were all ready to commit this file to your code repository, but now you're thinking, well, my company isn't going to let me put our data source passwords, in the repository. That's good. You should be thinking those thoughts. You might also want it to be a bit more portable. You might want to reuse the same server JSON file for local development, for a staging server, and for your Docker containers in production or whatever. And you want to have some slightly different settings, like trusted cache needs to be on in production but off for development, or maybe the mail servers need swapped out to be a different mail server. Do not despair, for we have system settings. So system settings are a combination of JVM properties and your operating system's environment variables. And if you're doing anything with cloud, it's all about the environment variables, right? So embrace it. So you can have placeholders in the CLI, in your box.json, in your server.json, or in your cfconfig.json files. Any of those files, you can use a placeholder, and it at runtime will be swapped out with the value of a JVM property or an environment variable from your operating system. So this allows you to externalize those secrets, or just those things that change, from outside of your JSON files. And this is actually just a core feature of CommandBox. It's been around since, I think, 3.7. So as a quick and dirty example, Windows, as well as Unix, has an operating system environment variable called path. So the format, and I have this on the next slide, looks like this. If I use the echo command in CommandBox and I tell it to echo out path, there is the actual path environment variable from my Windows computer, right? And so this placeholder right here is how you can grab these external environment variables and pull them in at runtime. So the placeholder looks like this. This follows what you're used to if you've done anything in Java. With Ant, they use the same kind of syntax. It's $sign with 2 curly brackets and then the name of the thing you want in the middle. So you can reference a Java property name or an operating system environment variable, whatever you want. And you can also supply a default. So you can make these kind of dynamic. You can say, look for an environment variable called HTTP port. colon, if it doesn't exist, use 8080 instead, right? And if it doesn't exist and you don't give it a default, it just returns an empty string, which is what you should be used to in environments like Bash and things like that. So the way you use it, it looks like this. You need to make sure you wrap quotes around it in your JSON file. This is an example of a server.json file, and you can see that the debug parameter, which is a true-false, we are referencing an environment variable called debug start, which I just invented that. You can call it whatever the heck you want. And if it's not set, then it defaults to false. So if you wanted to get debug output when you start a server, you could set an environment variable of debug start to true, and it would just get picked up automatically the next time a server starts. Same thing with the port. You could say the port number is dynamic. Look for an environment variable called HTTP port. If it's not there, just use 8080 instead. Same thing with your cfconfig JSON file. You can swap out things like the admin password, which is the plain text equivalent, right? If you don't want to put that password in your JSON file, you can set it into an environment variable called admin pass. It'll get sucked in and automatically replaced in the JSON file. That way it can be different per server and it can be secure. Doesn't have to be one placeholder. You can have as many as you want. So my setting, which is a made-up setting here, I have the word text followed by the value of foo, followed by the text here, followed by the value of bar, followed by the text to. And those will just all be replaced in line, just like you would expect Cold Fusion variables to be interpolated into a string. So this is super powerful because this lets you externalize the secret bits or the variable bits outside of your local environment, outside of your server, outside of your Docker images, wherever the heck it is you're using CommandBox to cfconfig, you can externalize all those private bits and you can make them super configurable at a global level. As far as settings, system settings, Java properties, environment variables, you can just set them in your local operating system using your Windows or Mac or Linux commands. So like on Windows, it would be set X and the name of the thing you wanted to set. If you're doing anything that's cloud, like Docker images or maybe Travis CI builds, they have built-in methods where you can set environment variables either via the web UI or via YAML files, and those will get picked up all the same. But what's really, really, really nice for local development is a sweet little module that Eric Peterson wrote called CommandBox.environment. What this allows you to do is to create a file called .env. Sorry, Windows users, you cannot create a file called .env unless you're in DOS, because Windows Explorer freaks out on you, right? You can do it, you just have to do it from DOS. Create a file called .env, drop it in the web root. You'd want to ignore it, right? Keep it out of your source control. Everybody creates their own local .env file. And it's just uses the same syntax as a Java property file. Name equals value, one per line, right? All of those properties will be automatically loaded into the server as JVM system properties whenever the server starts. And that's some magic the CommandBox.environment module does. So that's a super cool way you can kind of combine together multiple modules like the .environment module and the cfconfig module. So each of your local developers can have their own little local environment overrides, and they can just stick them in a file, which can be a little bit easier to manage than using actual environment variables with your operating system. Okay, so sorry, I went a little long. That's the last slide. So I didn't really do any demos because I had way too much junk to cover. What other questions do you guys have, or what out of all the nonsense I just talked about do you want me to actually do real quick from the command line? I can demo anything on any of these slides. It's just I would have spent twice as long if I demoed everything. That's really all there is for the slides. And these slides are going to be posted, by the way. We're putting these on SlideShare. What do you guys want to see? Anything? Anything at all? Thank you, David. Thank you. I didn't talk about this. cfconfig supports, I don't know, probably 90% of all the configuration stuff in Adobe and Lucy in the supported versions. There's a few dark nooks and crannies of very rarely used settings. I will say that you can implement the entire government STIG for Cold Fusion 11 with cfconfig. I actually worked on this with George Murphy in a project he's working on. He's working with a client, and they've scripted the entire official government STIG for CF11 entirely with a cfconfig JSON file. So they just do cfconfig import in this custom JSON file, and boom, the entire STIG's done, which has settings galore that need ticked on or off or manipulated. If there's anything that it doesn't support, and you're like for instance, I'll tell you right now, it doesn't support CFX tags, because frankly, who uses them, right? If you use them and that matters to you and you would like to use cfconfig to manage them, you have two options. One is send me a pull request like John Berquist did this week for Lucy Loggers, or two, call up Ortus and contract us to do it. I would love to have you pay me to add whatever it is you want. This is all professional open source. So if it doesn't do something you want it to do, we will take your money and we will make it do whatever you want. But I love pull requests as well. So just keep that in mind. Any other questions? If not, we can probably kill the recording. Last chance.